Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our webinar Zoom space. We will be starting our session shortly, so sit back, relax, and we will be with you in a matter of minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Demystifying Therapy, What Goes On in the Therapy Room. My name is Ethan Ganis, and I am your host for tonight. And we'd like to welcome you to the Reframe Project's regular webinar series that we hold every other quarter. Now, today, in this particular session, what we'd like to talk about is how can we better understand what goes on behind closed doors in the therapy room. Now, as time goes by, many of us realize that the solution to many of the challenges or psychological difficulties that we face can be attending psychotherapy and speaking to a therapist. But one big hindrance is exactly what goes on behind the closed doors. And for us to make sense of that today, we have a very special speaker. But before we go into that, let's just get a gauge of where we are here today as an audience. And for that, let's just do a really quick poll to see where we're at. We have a person who works in the back end. His name is Daryl. He's a really friendly guy. He's going to be helping us launch the polls. Daryl, can I get you to pull up our first poll for our audience tonight? Our first poll for tonight is mental health talked about often enough in Malaysia? So give us your thoughts. You should be able to see it pop up on your screen. Do vote. Tell us what you think. Okay, see the numbers coming in. All right, it seems that all of you are responding very quickly. It's good to hear or see. Okay, let's give it a couple more seconds. Okay. For those of you who have just come in, we are currently just doing a really quick poll to understand where everybody is on some of the thoughts about mental health. Okay. Okay, let's close up the first poll and see what the results are. Okay, so it seems like the results is many of us, 84%, believe that mental health is not talked about often enough in Malaysia. Okay, thank you for sharing. Let's move on to our second poll. Okay, the next question is, it's normal to seek mental health assistance. This is a true or false question or an unsure question. So please do go ahead, just give us your thoughts. It's normal to seek mental health assistance. true, false, or unsure? Okay, we see the numbers coming in. Okay, the majority have answered. Let's give it another second. And Daryl, can we see the results, please? Okay, fantastic. So we have a majority, 78% saying that they feel that it is normal to seek mental health assistance. And we do have a significant proportion who still feel that it is not quite normal. And that's perfectly okay. Today, we're here to see how we can make it just a little bit more normal through webinars like this. Okay, Daryl, on to the next one, please. Next question is, only people who have serious mental health conditions can seek therapy. Is this true, false, or are you currently unsure? Okay. It seems to be a question that requires a little bit more thinking and deliberation. Okay, and the majority have answered. Daryl, can you please share with us the results? Okay, and it seems that the results from our audience says that most of us feel that it is false, and people who have less serious mental health conditions can also seek therapy. And we do have one individual who's unsure. For everybody in the audience, we do have a Q&A session coming up later, so save those questions up and we'll address them in good time. And now our final quick question, can we have that up on stage? Okay, this final question is, would you be comfortable seeking therapy if you needed it? Feel free to give us your honest thoughts so we can better understand where you're coming from, and just adjust and see if there's any additional comfort we can take in our sharings. Okay. Okay, looks like most of you have submitted your answers. Can we please reveal the answers? Okay, to those of you who have shared for this question, thank you for telling us your thoughts. It's always good for us to know when we begin a session how we can gear our responses better. So it seems that 80% of our audience does feel comfortable, and we still have 20 who may be feeling a little bit hesitant. Well, thank you all for participating in our quick poll. It helps us understand you better. And as we go along, we hope that you'll ask us the questions you need to help get you more comfortable when it comes to therapy. Okay, now moving on to our next bit. Since we've gotten things slightly underway, and since this is a webinar, no event can officially be begun without having the audience warmly welcomed. And for that, we have somebody who's very special to us. She is the founder of the Reframe Project. In our previous webinar, she was working as a social worker with health equities initiatives with populations that are marginalized. Now she's pursuing her master's in clinical psychology. When I asked her, what is one thing you want me to say about you? She gave a very humbling topic, which is, please tell everyone that I love matcha very much. So now that you know what to treat her to when you see her, let's invite her to the stage. Can we please invite Shaswini to give her welcoming address?
Thank you, Ethan. Good morning, everyone. Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Reframe Project, I would like to extend my warm welcome to all attendees and Dr. Joelle. Thank you for taking your time to join us this wonderful evening. We truly appreciate your presence here today. The Reframe Project actually consists of a group of youth that are passionate about psychology and mental health, and we hope to increase the public's awareness of mental health by creating digestible and accurate educational content. And we aim to reframe the perception of mental health. Next slide. So some of the past webinars that we have organized include differences between counselors, clinical psychologists, and psychiatrists, decriminalizing suicide, and also 2 webinars in Bahasa Malaysia about how to encourage loved ones to seek help and the process of seeking help. Fret not if you have missed it all, as the recordings are actually available on our Facebook page and YouTube. Next. So now I would like to, now here we are with our sixth webinar, and I would like to show my appreciation to my excellent team um, here who worked hard for this webinar despite having other commitments. Ethan, our amazing moderator for today, and Cindy are truly incredible. We meet up often to check in and ensure that we are right on track. Daryl Law, being the technical person behind today's webinar, he handles it efficiently. Anis, Huizi, and Charlene, who are from the content team, and they come up with fantastic content in both Malay and English, with Nelissa coordinating the content team. I would also like to thank Angelina for being so supportive in this webinar, helping where needed. Lastly, our fantastic designer, Kyra, who has been designing the content alongside Melissa. My deepest gratitude to all of you. Without all their contribution, we would not be able to have this webinar. I'd also like to thank the Malaysian Centre for Constitutional and Human Rights, MCCHR, for consistently supporting our events. They are a non-profit organization established with a mission of providing an integrated approach towards the protection and promotion of human rights in Malaysia through civic education and strategic litigation. They have been graciously providing us with their Zoom account to host all our webinars as well as funding assistance. Thank you so much for your continuous support in helping us bring events like this to the public. Speaking about our webinar today, I'd like to touch upon on how this webinar came about. As I was planning the content last year, I noticed that there were not enough awareness and understanding around this topic. Moreover, we are still tied by the narratives and stigma that people should not go for therapy or only go for therapy when it's serious. I felt that we needed this webinar to happen to reframe those narratives and raise the needed awareness on this topic. So we, the Reframe Project, once again thank all of you here for coming. Let's reframe the perception of mental health together. Thank you, and back to you, Ethan.
Thank you, Jasmine, for welcoming us, sharing us your thoughts behind the scenes of how this came about, and also letting us know that we can do more to inform each other about what goes on in therapy. Now, for us to kickstart our session today, we just wanted to share a little bit more about, some of the statistics or numbers you may have heard about when it comes to mental health cases in Malaysia. So some of this data here that you see is coming from the year 2019, when one of the biggest surveys were done. Now, noting that this is before pre-pandemic, we see that the national prevalence of depression is actually quite high, at a 2.3%. This number here that's alarmingly large, 424,000 children were found to have mental health problems in Malaysia. And you can see some categories here that have been researched by our writing team, our content team, talking about how you can see the gap by socioeconomic groups. Here listed that a lot of the people who face these mental health issues are in fact coming from rural areas. And in fact, all across the board, we see that many people are suffering from mental health conditions. And this particularly being depressiveness. Now, the next set of data we can take a look here, also drawn from the 2019 statistics, is that the depression statistics based on household, there is still a similar pattern, but it is unacknowledgeable that we definitely have to look at the fact that the B40 come in with a significantly higher percentage here at 2.7%. And alarmingly, 3 in 10 aged 16 years and above suffer some form of mental health issues, with multiple areas contributing to this. Now, in the recent years, more recently in 2021, Astra Awani, one of our news networks, released some of the reasons that have come up in the past couple of years, sharing with us some of the things that may have led to mental illness and the spike that has happened in this recent couple of years. And these few things may not be very surprising. The loss of a loved one, the loss of job and income, ongoing financial distress, new COVID-19 variants, family issues from isolation, and loss of a place of dependence. Now, as we start getting back into the rhythm of life post-lockdown, the question still remains. Mental health was a challenge before the pandemic, and it remained a challenge during, and the spike went even higher. So what are some things we can do about it? If you were to read any article out there or speak to anybody you know, there's a good chance at some point somebody will recommend going for therapy. And although that is a mysterious process, what we hope to do today is to demystify therapy. And for that, we have our speaker for today, who I'm just going to introduce to all of us. He's a very friendly face. He's someone who is a clinical psychologist and a director of the Mind Psychological Services and Training. He's an EXCO member on the Malaysian Society for Clinical Psychologists, specializes in CBT. He is also a lecturer in Monash, and as per his very interesting and well-rounded bio, is a lover of pizza. Can we please invite to the stage Dr. Joelle? Dr. Joelle, can we get you to reveal yourself to us?
Hi there, Ethan.
Okay, fantastic. It's good to see you, Dr. Joelle. I thought we'd just begin a little bit by understanding you.
Yeah, sure.
If we could just ask you, Dr. Joelle, in this mental health field, like what is your role on a day-to-day basis, and what
Yep.
would you say you do in your capacity?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a clinical psychologist. So primarily the bulk of my time is spent at the mind, right? And there I have hold two major responsibilities, well, three actually. First one is obviously seeing my clients, so working as a clinical psychologist, doing my work with with them and all that kind of good stuff. Second one would be to manage the place, which is I think that's my full-time job. I think therapy is way more enjoyable and way more fun. But you got to pay the bills, so no choice there. And I think the third responsibility that I have on a daily basis is as a supervisor, right? So what I do is also at the Mind, we are a supervisory site. So we bring on master's level students to train them, right? And to try and get them to be the best therapists they can be. So those are typically my responsibilities on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, thank you for sharing, Dr. Joel. So you've got both sides of the view, running the center itself. You supervise other potential psychologists and counselors, and you've also got actually practicing itself. So you have a few different perspectives. And it's our pleasure to have you here, helping to bring some light to this. Now, in today's webinar, we just thought we'd begin a couple of ways. We have some common questions we want to ask you.
Sure.
After that, we'll go through a case study situation, and we'll close up by getting some audience Q&A.
Sounds good.
Okay, so let's begin just by understanding a little bit more. If you were to explain it to a person or an audience member, what would you say exactly is therapy? And how would you describe it to someone who has never been to therapy?
That's a really good question. And I think that's a hard question to answer as well, because I think therapy can be very different from person to person and different times as well. I think when you're going through different things in your life, naturally the therapy that you experience and you go through and you need is going to be different, right? But I think for someone who has not been to therapy before, I would say that therapy is a conversation between two people, right? The only thing is that this person that you're speaking to is not someone who knows you, right? They're not a friend, they're not a family member. They're, in all for intents and purposes, they're a stranger, right? But this is a stranger who is invested in your well-being. This is a stranger who wants to help you get better and get you back on your feet. And this is also a stranger who has, years of training and experience that can help guide you to where you need to go to, right? I think that's one of the biggest issues about therapy, in the sense that people always think that it's something that is earth-shatteringly scary. It's gonna make you cry. It's gonna make you, crack up, and you got to build yourself back again. And to be fair, those things can happen in therapy, but by and large, it's really a conversation between two people, right? So if you've ever gone to a coffee place and had coffee with someone, it's pretty much that, just a lot more intense, and sometimes there's some tears flowing here and there as well.
Okay, so putting it very simply, I suppose it's having a conversation between two people towards a particular goal that is sometimes a little bit more intense.
That's right.
Okay, so if you had to follow up, right, I guess a lot of people will also ask, as we noted earlier, when or how do you know that you would need to seek therapy? Are there some indicators?
Yeah. So if you want to go technical, right, I think one of the main factors that we consider is one's ability to function, right? So like for us, for example, one thing that we look out for is something called social and occupational functioning. It sounds fancy, but it's not really. It's actually quite a simple concept, right? So our ability to function in society, in our lives, in our communities and all that is determined by two facets, right? How well we're able to function socially. That means in social interactions with other people, friends and family members and all that. Can we go out? Can we connect with people? Can we be friends and things like that? And the other one is occupational functioning. Occupational basically means what you do, right? Be it education and studying, or maybe going to work, for example. So things that you're doing, right? And the idea here is that if you're able to function in these two categories, then by and large, you're doing pretty okay. You're all right. Yeah, no issue there. But every now and then, there will be disruptions to it, either because, you're so anxious to a point that you can't go to work because of COVID, let's say, for example, or if, let's say, something bad happened and you're feeling really down and depressed, and because of that, I disengage socially from people. And I think that's a pretty good indication or benchmark or signpost, sorry, that tells you that maybe therapy is something that can be helpful for you at this point of time, right? But I think that aside, I think that's a quite fairly technical way to gauge when you need to come in for therapy, right? But I think that aside, from a more simplistic perspective, I think the instant you start wondering or asking yourself that question, hey, should I go for therapy? Do I need therapy? I think that's a pretty good indication that you might want to come in, right? Best case scenario, you come in, see the therapist, first session, talk about it and say, hey, it's nothing big. It's just a normal reaction to an abnormal problem, and that's it. And then that's fine. It's okay. So off you go. You rise, really no issues after a couple of days. Worst case scenario, it's the precursor to something bigger, and we catch it as early as possible, and we try and mitigate the worst of it in that sense, right? So I think that's probably some good indications when you should come in for therapy.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Joelle, for highlighting that. I guess on a more technical perspective, it's whether or not we're still able to carry out our social interactions and functions
That's right.
and what we do, I guess, at work or at studies. And I thought that was a really clever question, so I'm going to remember that. If I ever catch myself asking myself the question, should I see a therapist?
Yeah.
That's a good indicator I should go in.
That's
so
right.
just go in for the first second, see what is the situation like. And I like that as well. It's a good point on catching something before it spirals down to a more tricky situation. I just wanted to ask your thoughts as well. Are there any simpler instances or more common instances that people go into therapy? We've talked about functioning, but what about a step back from that?
So I think in the realm of therapy, a lot of people think that it's only when someone is clinically depressed or having panic attacks, for example, that's when you go for therapy. But that's not the case. I think while a lot of times, let's say, I think probably about 7 out of times, 8 out of 10 times in that sense, right? I think people come in for therapy because they are facing significant issues, be it clinical or otherwise, right? So, for example, the day-to-day kind of stresses as well, right? Stress at work, communication skills, relationship issues, and things like that. Those are also things that people can come in for therapy for. But every now and then, that 2 or 3 out of 10 times where clients come in, right, and it's really not about anything problematic, so to speak. So it's not like they've got an issue that they want to resolve or an issue that they're trying to fix, but they can come in and just want to explore and just get to understand themselves better and see how they tick, basically, right? I think all of us have our own internal drivers and motivations, which are great. But I think the issue with a lot of us is that it's unknown. We don't know why we do what we do. Like the intentionality isn't always there, in that sense, right? Which in most situations is not too much of an issue, but sometimes because you're running on autopilot, that also means our reactions to things can be quite random because we just don't know why we're doing what we're doing. So that's another good way to use therapy as well, just to make yourself understand yourself better and things like that. If you see a clinical psychologist, then you might do something like a personality test, for example. And this is an assessment that you can do and find more information by yourself. Or therapy, right? I think that's also a good way to just be more introspective and understand yourself better. So those are some other things that you can use therapy for.
Okay, so another perhaps underexplored aspect is also for us to get to know ourselves a little bit better. What are some of the reasons why we do certain things and respond the way we do? Whether it's those responses or going in to get an assessment for things like, I suppose, IQ and personality testing and so on. Dr. Joelle, so going off of that, we do see your profile. We know that you are an experienced clinical psychologist. And a very common question is, who in the world should someone see? Is it a counselor? Is it a clinical psychologist? Is it a psychiatrist?
Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit more? How would we run around that? I know it's a very common question.
Fantastic question. I think that's a good question because I think people do get confused and sometimes it's daunting. You don't even know where to start, right? So like you rightly said just then, I think the 3 major mental health providers in Malaysia, and this is unique to Malaysia because obviously when you look at the States and the UK and things like that, then they have variations of this, right? But in Malaysia in particular, it's counselors, clinical psychologists, and psychiatrists, right? And the main difference between the 3 is in 2 places. One is the kind of clients that we work with, and the other one is the the treatment processes that we put our clients through in that sense, right? So we start with counselors, right? So counselors typically deal with more day-to-day kind of issues, right? So stress at work, communication skills, relationship issues, and that kind of thing. So these are not necessarily things that are super out there like depression, schizophrenia, bipolar. It's not that, right? But these are just really day-to-day things that you're going through, right? So if you want to get technical about it, these are basically your adjustment disorders, for example. Something that has happened, there's a negative life event that's occurred, and your reaction towards it is just a bit more severe or a bit more longer than usual in that sense, right? And counselors do fantastic work with that, right? And their main method of treatment would be talk therapy, right? Psychotherapy, right? So be it CBT or ACT or psychodynamic psychotherapy or what have you, that's usually the medium of treatment that counselors would do, okay? Now, for clinical psychologists, we do everything that the counselor does, but we also see clinical populations. That means people who are having clinical disorders like schizophrenia, obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, PTSD, for example, major depressive disorder, panic attacks, that kind of thing, right? So everything the counselor does, and we see that extra population as well. And again, similar to counselors, our main medium of treatment would be talk therapy, right? So again, using CBT and all the kind of good stuff to help our clients. Now, the final category would be the psychiatrist, right? So this is, I'll caveat this by saying that this is true for most of the psychiatrists in Malaysia, but not all, right? There are some exceptions, of course. In Malaysia, in particular, psychiatrists typically work with all the populations that clinical psychologists would see, so day-to-day kind of issues and also the clinical issues, but the main medium of treatment is medication, right? Now, the caveat here is that there are some psychiatrists out there who do psychotherapy, although to the extent of my knowledge, I think I can count in one hand how many people who does it. People that I know, to be fair, there could be more, but typically the main method of treatment is medication, right? And again, this is unique to Malaysia because when you start going off to the United States, for example, Australia or the UK, you see that there are a lot more it overlaps in that sense, right? So there are some clinical psychologists, for example, who have gotten extra certifications and is able to dispense medication. Traditionally in the States, for example, the main people who do psychotherapy are psychiatrists anyway, so they do a combination of psychotherapy and medication. And also, there's also counselors who are counseling psychologists who are able to do some kind of assessments, which in Malaysia it's typically done by clinical psychologists. But again, those are overseas. In Malaysia, counselors, clinical psychologists, psychiatrists, these are the three main categories, and this is the work that we do.
Okay, thanks for sharing, Dr. Joelle. So if I'm hearing you correctly, typically when we have counselors involved, a lot of it can be the day-to-day challenges, the stresses, more broader categories. When we speak about clinical psychologists, those are for something a bit more pathological, something related to disorders, more abnormal range. Whereas if we're talking about psychiatry, that could possibly be psychotherapy. It could also be seeing clinical populations, but it could also largely involve medication here in Malaysia.
That's right.
Okay, thanks for summing that up for us, Dr. Joelle. And I'm guessing from an audience perspective, the next question that probably comes up is what exactly is the psychotherapy itself? So for this time, I guess how we try to see, in a webinar, how we can go around this is if we can come up with a case itself and get you to help us dissect that. So I guess we can move on to that bit. So I'm just going to share my screen. What we've done here at the Reframe Project is just come up with a more relatable, simple case. And we've recorded a couple of videos with trainee therapists to just showcase what a session might be like and get some of the thoughts from Dr. Joelle. So we've got two types of sessions that we'll display shortly. But before we get into that, let me just share with everyone what the topic will be for this client. Okay, so if you can see my screen, this is a sample case. So in this case, please meet Adam. So Adam here is a 24-year-old administrative worker. Adam has been working for the past 2 years. He's been given a new role, and for some reason, he's performing poorly. He believes he doesn't have the right skills or expectations to meet expectations, but can't leave due to financial commitments. He works overtime. He can't spend any time with his family. His friends have stopped inviting him out. And after 2 months, he's finding he's got some serious difficulty focusing on work and sleeping. He feels heavy all the time. He has a sense of emptiness and sadness for most of his hours that he's awake. He never feels rested. He's getting to the point where he asks himself and is starting to wonder, what is the point of even working? So in this scenario, Adam wants to get control of his life again and decides to see a therapist. And for this, we have two particular videos. One of it is to demonstrate what is the first time meeting a therapist like, and the second one is midway in session. For that, Dr. Joelle, do you mind if I hand the stage over to you to play the videos and take the session?
Sure thing. Just give me a second.
Okay. Virtual stage is yours, Dr. Joelle.
Thank you.
All right.
Ethan, I think I need to get you. Okay, there we go. It's a bit of a lag there. All right, let me share my computer sound. Okay. So what we're going to do, and the people at the Reframe Project have done this wonderful mock case video right, of a person getting therapy, which I thought was fantastic, right? And I think this is good because this allows me to then zoom in and then highlight some certain aspects of the therapy session and what's going on, right? So we'll start off with the intake session, and what we'll do is that along the way, I'll pause the video and just offer some insights, and I think it's interesting, and it'll be good for you guys to hear from, to understand what's going on. Yeah. So let me start playing. Ethan, if there's any issues, just let me know, then I can restart it or whatever it is. Okay.
Can do.
Hello, Adam. How are you doing today?
Hi, hello. I'm doing okay. I'm just quite tired from work.
Okay, I see. Did you do anything over the weekend? Anything interesting?
Not much. I think I was just at home.
At home.
Work has been making me quite tired lately.
Right, I see.
So just this first like 30 seconds or so of the video, right? I think this is something that I want to share. So this is quite normal now, right? Because of COVID. Thank you, COVID, right? So a lot of sessions are done online, right? Although now we are starting to open up for more physical sessions and we are doing the more traditional kind of therapy where in the same room together. This iteration is actually quite common, and a lot of people are actually choosing to do therapy more online than in person. For many reasons, like that sense. Now, I think with every setting that you do therapy in brings itself its own challenges, right? So, for example, at the Mind, we have a physical space for us to do therapy, which is good because I think there's just something special. There's this different kind of a power that is to be had when you're sharing a space with someone and talking about issues and all that kind of things. But the issues with that is, of course, things like safety. If you're starting therapies, things like overheads, for example, and keeping the lights on and things like that. So there's some issues inherently involved in that. On top of that, also is things like security as well. Right? Wanting to make sure that your clients are safe when therapy is going on. Online sessions, again, there are lots of benefits to it. I think it gives you easy access to clients no matter where you are, whether they're in Malaysia or otherwise. For example, it's the cost is minimal. You just need to have some kind of video platform for you to do your video on and all that kind of good stuff, right? But inherently, there are also cons for using online therapy as well. So one thing, for example, is safety and security. So while you're in the physical space in the therapy center, for example, it's easy to contain things. So that means everything that is said in the session can be kept in the session. No one is going to find out. But when you use an online platform like this, I think a few things to consider are things like, although it's secure on your end, it might not be secure on the client's end. And having that conversation with the client to make sure that it's secure on the end is important, right? The other one is just to make sure that you use a platform that is safe, right? So typically we don't use Facebook Messenger video calls, for example, or WhatsApp video calls, just because it's not as safe as other platforms, right? Paid Zoom, for example, Zoom, where it's not a free account where you got to pay for it, actually gives you a HIPAA compliancy. HIPAA is, I can't remember what it stands for, but it's basically a medical standard for video calls like this, so that make sure that there's no video being stored anywhere. It's end-to-end in that sense. Another thing I want to highlight in this first 30 seconds is that exchange that you saw between the therapist and the client, that's really pretty much it. Like, that's therapy in a nutshell. Obviously, the content changes as we go along, but that's really how it's like. It's a conversation between the two people, like I said just then. So this is a very nice introduction, and it's not, how do you put it? Not just because this is a role play doesn't mean that this isn't how it's like. No, this is exactly how it's like. If you came and saw me for therapy, this is how I start off as well. Hey, how are you? How are you doing? Have you had lunch yet or dinner yet? And things like that, right? Okay. Right. So let's keep going.
Okay. All right. Before we move on, right, Adam, I'd like to discuss the informed consent form with you that I shared earlier on some of the rights you have as a client in this therapy session. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So first of all, everything we discussed in this session is strictly confidential, and know that your information and identity, like your name, it will not be disclosed to anyone outside this room to protect your privacy. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Unless we believe that there is a reason that you might be at risk of danger, then we may reach out to your emergency contacts. But of course, before that, we would let you know beforehand first to figure out what are the necessary information that we can reveal to them.
All right. So at this point here, I want to pause this video because I think this is one of the more important, unfortunately underrated and also unknown aspects of therapy, especially in the first couple of sessions, right? And what Grace, the therapist, just did was something we call informed consent, right? Any good therapy is predicated on confidentiality, and that basically means that the client can be safe, can rest. That's not the right word. Can be assured that everything that they share in the session is going to be confidential, right? And confidentiality means that nothing that they share with us in the room is going to be shared with anybody else. Now, you might think that's trivial, but there's inherently a lot of power behind that statement in that sense, right? Because, I think one thing that sets us apart from you speaking to your friends and family members, for example, is the fact that if you told your friend, for example, that, I've got a big crush on someone, or I just broke up with my wife of 10 years, for example, and things like that, inherently you don't know how or where the information is going to go to, because there's nothing binding in that sense, and they're friends and family members as well, so there's nothing to bind anyways. But in the therapy room, when the confidentiality is assured in that sense, that it's something that you are provided, you are guaranteed that with certain limitations I'll talk about in a little bit, right? That inherently gives the client a lot of freedom to talk about anything and everything that you want, right? And that can be very, very cathartic, because I'm in a place right now where I can speak about anything and everything that's on my mind. And I'm assured in the fact that I know that my therapist isn't going to freak out and tell everybody that I know what just happened in that sense, right? So I think there's inherently a lot of power behind that. And I think that's quite important for the clients to make sure that they know that they can speak freely and safely, which is great, right? That's one. Now, the second thing that Grace mentioned just now was that there are some exceptions to this confidentiality clause, right? And these exceptions are basically has to do with the idea of harm, right? What that means basically is that if there's any evidence of harm being had by the client, either in terms of homicidality, that means they are trying to hurt other people or other people are trying to hurt them, or if suicidality, that means the clients trying to hurt themselves, right? So either self-harm or suicidal behaviors, for example, and things like that. In those kind of occurrences, what's going to happen is that because our interest is the client's safety, we want to make sure that they're going to be okay and that life is preserved, we might have to break confidentiality, like what Grace mentioned just then, right? There's some procedures involved and all that kind of good stuff, but ultimately the main goal is to make sure that you're safe and that you don't hurt yourself or other people get hurt, for example, and things like that, right? There's one more added layer to that as well. Let's say, for example, we get subpoenaed by the court of law. So there's an impending court case, for example, and the judge has ruled that, okay, I need your therapy notes because I need to ascertain this person's credibility from a psychological perspective, for example, right? In those instances, we are not above the law, so we'll be obliged to give the information to the judge, but only to that judge and specifically what they're asking for, right? To be fair, in Malaysia, that almost never happens, so that's not always an issue, so it's not too big a concern in that sense, right? So those are only two, maybe three incidences where confidential will be breached. Other than that, right, everything else that you share with us is confidential, right? To give you a real world scenario, right, only if you give me written permission am I allowed to share information with anybody. And even then also you get to specify who this information goes to, right? For example, if you want to let your spouse know, or if you want me to liaise with your psychiatrist, for example, I will then get your written permission to do so. That means you sign off on the contract. We call it a release of information form, basically, right? So they say, okay, Joelle, you're allowed to share this information with XYZ people, right? Now, we take this so seriously that, let's say, for example, Adam, in this case, study that we're looking at, right? Adam's mom calls me up and says, hey, I know that Adam is coming to see you for therapy. I just want to check in on him and make sure he's okay. Can I do that, right? Not only, when I get a call like that, right, not only will I not answer the mom's question and tell them what's happening with Adam, I will actually deny all knowledge of Adam, right? So my typical response to a question like that would be, thanks for calling in. Let's say the name Sarah, for example, the mom's name is Sarah. Hey, Sarah, thanks for calling in. Unfortunately, at this point, I can't confirm nor deny whether I'm seeing Adam or not. If you believe that Adam is seeing me, then why don't you get Adam to give me a call or drop me an email, and then from there, he can give me permission to speak to you. If not, then I cannot confirm nor deny, right? Now, the reason why I do it that way is not because I'm trying to evade the mom or anything like that, no. But me just acknowledging and that fact that Adam is coming for therapy can be very revealing in that sense. Let's say, for example, Adam wanted to keep this secret from the family, and I said that, yeah, I'm seeing Adam, but I can't tell you what's going on. The mom already has a lot of information, right? The mom already knows that Adam's coming for therapy, and that is an issue. So that's how we will navigate that kind of scenario. So rest assured, if you're coming to see a therapist, your information is in safe hands. We don't share this with anyone, and it doesn't go anywhere without your permission. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. You mentioned danger. What sort of danger?
All right. So most of the time, we have clients that come in with suicidal thoughts or self-harm behaviors. So that is like the danger that I'm talking about, and we want to ensure that none of our clients go through that, because like your safety is our priority. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So lastly, you have every right to withdraw or terminate the therapy session anytime, and we will not hold you accountable for it. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
So do you have any questions for me so far?
No.
No? Okay. All right. That's great.
This is a quick one. So you saw how Grace asked the client for feedback about whether the client has any questions or concerns and things like that, right? You also noticed that a therapist would do that quite often with you, or at least most therapists would do that quite often with you. And the reason for that is because we, especially here in Malaysia, we are quite used to or familiar with the traditional doctor-patient kind of a model, right? So let's say you've got a cold or a fever. You go see the doctor asks you for, your symptoms and what's going on and things like that, your history, says, okay, take these 2 Panadols 3 times a day and then you feel better after that. And then so what I do, I'll take the medication, go back and eat, done, finish, right? I just listen to my doctor and then we're good to go, right? Therapy is a bit different. Because like, for example, myself, right, as good as I am doing what I do, and I hope I am doing good at doing what I do, right, I'm still not the expert of the client, and the client is still the expert of themselves, right? So although I have good techniques and methods that I know can be helpful, the client should also be choosing about or letting us know what kind of methods or what kind of techniques that they find suitable or helpful for them, right? Because it's not a one size fits all kind of situation in that sense, right? So this feedback that we solicit from our clients is going to be important because that allows us to then customize the sessions to fit the client the best. So if you're going for therapy and you have something that you want to, like, my therapist does this one thing that I don't really like, but I don't know whether I should tell or not. My response to you is please do tell them, right? The more they know, the more they can do, and the more they can do, the better it is for you as well. Yeah.
Great. So maybe you can get started, and maybe you can start sharing with me what has been bothering you lately.
Okay. So I've been working for about 2 years now, and I've been in the same company. And recently they gave me a new role. And usually when somebody, in a company is given a new role, usually it would be like an upgrade, and usually they might be happy, and I did feel that way. I was happy that I was given this new role, but recently I've realized that I feel like I'm not skilled enough. I don't have the right skills, and I don't have the right experience to perform my duties in this role. And because of that, I've been feeling like I've been dragging the company down, and that's been making me quite unhappy. I did think of changing jobs, but I don't think I'll do that right now, because I've only been in this company for 2 years, and because I do have financial constraints, so I can't afford to be unemployed right now, and I think that has been making me quite sad.
Okay, all right. So from what I'm hearing, that you've been feeling very incompetent in your new role. Yeah, and financial issues sounds to be like a concern for you as well, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. How has that like?
Okay. So something that Grace did this time I wanted to highlight, right? So what you'll find that therapists do sometimes is that after obviously we ask you about your story and you're telling us about what's going on and all that kind of good stuff, right? What you'll find is that sometimes our therapist would then reflect back to us about what's going on. The technical term for this is called paraphrasing, where we are listening to what you have to say, processing it, and then putting it back to you just to make sure that we are on the same page, basically, right? And I think Grace did a wonderful job there, and I think that's typically how we would do that as well, right? But I think that's also something that's important because I think what differentiates a therapist, a counselor, or psychologist, or whatever it is, right, from the auntie and uncle in the market, for example, right, is what we are listening out for, right? A lot of times, if you hear this kind of story from a friend or family member, for example, your natural curiosity is going to surface in that sense, and you want to know more, right? those of you guys who are Chinese speakers, you know, the feeling that this will elicit is part lah, right? I want to part. I just want to find out more because I'm curious. How come? What's going on? Tell me more. What's this? It sounds like, oh, juicy news. I want to find out more. I want to know more. That kind of thing, right? And that's just normal human curiosity, which is fine, right? But a therapist, when we hear stories like this, right, our natural inclination is one of also curiosity, no doubt. But I think curiosity in the sense of we want to try and find out what's going on and what's happening, right? So if we rewind to what Adam was saying just now about his new role and his job and things like that, as a therapist, I'm already thinking, okay, he's saying that he's got a new role and he's got expectations in this new role about how wonderful and good it should be. But you know, why is that? How come he's got an automatic reaction that he's thinking that way? He also talked about how, you know, I think I'm going to be really bad at this job. You know, I'm going to tank in this job, for example. I should quit. I shouldn't try anymore, for example, and things like that. And again, for me, when I'm listening to that, I'm thinking, oh, okay, the client's catastrophizing. Catastrophizing meaning that he's thinking about the worst case scenarios, worst possible situations, and things like that. And again, in on its own, it's good information. But from a therapist point of view, immediately I'm thinking, oh, why is that? Why is that happening? Right? What makes Adam have these kind of self-defeating, you know, self-handicapping kind of thoughts, for example. And when I listen to the client stories, that's really what I'm doing, building this idea or this frame of what's going on with the client, so that later on we can explore with them and see what's going on. Yeah.
Impact your daily life so far?
I think because I haven't been performing, I would need to stay on at work longer, you know, maybe like a couple more hours. So like when people are going home at like 6, you know, I'll need to stay until like maybe 8 or 9. And not only has that been making me quite tired, but I've also been sacrificing my social life. I haven't really been spending time with my parents lately and my friends as well. I think because I cancelled plans with my friends quite a number of times, I think they sort of understand that it's a pattern already, you know. And, you know, I thought they will understand because it's work, you know, and I don't blame them as well because, you know, like I've cancelled a few times, you know, so I haven't been spending time with my loved ones, and I think that's been making me quite sad.
Okay, that explains why you told me that you were just staying at home, not doing anything over the weekend, right? Yeah, because you're so burnt out from work. Yeah, you sound really burnt out, and you used to spend a lot more time with your friends and your family over the weekend, but right now you're just taking time to recharge, right, over the weekend before Monday starts work again, right? Okay. So thank you so much, Adam, for being so vulnerable with me. So maybe let's set some expectations for us right now.
Okay. A couple of things to note there, right? So, you know, I think Grace is doing a wonderful job because she's engaging with your therapist, with the client, right? I think one thing about the Hollywood version of therapy that we see quite a bit is that the therapist is always usually someone who's, you know, old, wearing spectacles, very stoic, you know, no emotions, don't react to whatever clients are saying. You know, clients are lying down and then the therapist is sitting behind them taking notes and things like that. That is, to be fair, one iteration of therapy, but it's a really, really old school iteration of therapy, and we don't really do that nowadays. Grace is portraying everything that a modern therapist should be. Like, she's engaging, she's reacting to the client. When it's appropriate, she was smiling and chuckling with the client as well when the client was telling about the stories and things like that. And these are all important non-verbal cues that we would engage you with in that sense to try and connect with you, right? I think one thing that I think Grace is doing really well at this point is trying to build that therapeutic rapport, a therapeutic relationship with that client, which is great. Yeah. And also at the end, towards the end of this clip here, Grace actually said thank you to the client for sharing. I think sometimes, you know, it's not easy to share your story. It's not easy to share your most vulnerable moments and things like that. So I think as therapists, it's on us to acknowledge and to advocate and acknowledge, and as I said just then, about the client's you know, courage to be able to share something like this with us. Yeah.
So maybe you can share with me what are some goals that you would like to achieve in our therapy session?
Goals? Oh, okay. Because this is actually my first time going for therapy, a few of my friends recommended, you know, they said I should go for therapy. And I think I know a little bit about therapy. I know it has to do with psychology, you know, like you can like read minds and things like that. So
we don't read minds on this. Yeah.
So I don't really know what to expect. And as for goals, I haven't really thought about it. I just feel like I've been losing control of my life recently, you know, and I think I would like to gain back some of that control. I would like to learn how. And I also want to know what to do when I'm feeling tired and when I'm feeling sad. I think that maybe, I don't know, there are some steps or some activities that I can do. So I guess that would be it.
Okay. All right. So from what I'm hearing is that you would like to maybe gain back a bit of sense of control, and also learn some of like maybe some tips or some techniques on how you can cope better with all these stressful situations that you're going through, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So thank you so much for sharing that with me. So with all that you shared with me just now, maybe you can come up with like a more structured goals in our next meeting. And then maybe we can work it out together to see what are some things that suits you best, so that we can help you achieve those goals together. All right?
Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much, Adam, for being here today.
Okay.
All right. So in that last scene there, right, Grace was asking the client for the goals that the client has, and then this is typically again something that you see very often in the first session, right? Because ultimately, as therapists, we want to know what you want to do, right? We want to know what you want to achieve, right? And that's the goal setting thing that Grace and Adam are doing to stand up towards the end, right? Now, that's quite an important aspect of therapy, right? I think sometimes, when life gets us down, right, it can feel like, everything and anything and all is just weighing down on us, and it can feels very overwhelming, right? So when you ask a client, or when your therapist asks you for goal setting like this, it does a few things. I think one thing that it does that's quite important is help us prioritize. We cannot fix everything at once, not at least, right? So I think by making ourselves set the goals, and what Grace said just then, okay, these are your overarching goals, and moving forward, let's try and pinpoint and make it more structured and find out what are things that we should focus on first and foremost and things like that. This is a really good way to just make prioritize what are things that we can achieve in therapy right now, right, or in the immediate future, in that sense. So that's one aspect. Second one is also that, I think it's important that we learn how to also break down goals, right? I think a lot of times clients will come in, like what Adam said, he knows some things about therapy, but not really. I mean, he said read minds, so I wonder how much he knows about therapy, right? But I think that we need to set we need to set expectations as well, right? A lot of times clients will come in and say things like, hey, Joelle, I want to be happy again, And I think while that's a really good goal, and I think a lot of people want to achieve that, inherently it's a very problematic goal, right? And the reason why I say that is because happiness is so different from person to person, isn't it? Some people happy is, being able to go to a Bazaar Ramadan and, have a fantastic spread of food brought back home, for example, to share with family. Some people's idea of happy is, hey, my family is safe, the COVID's gone away, and in the family and everyone is healthy, it'll be great. For me, happy is not watching Arsenal lose again, because it's a very, very sad team at the moment, for example, right? So happiness is really a subjective kind of thing, right? So when clients say, hey, I want to be happy, I often tell them, hey, that's good, and I think that's something we can hit towards, but inherently it's a horrible goal, because what is happy, right? And when I get to ask them a question like that, then we're able to break that down, and so we can really understand what makes this client happy. So by that, we kill two birds with one stone. We understand better about how to set goals, right? Set more specific, concrete goals. And then also on top of that, also understand how the client thinks, what makes them happy and things like that. Okay. All right, so fantastic intake session. I know it's only 5 minutes, but I think it covered all the major bits and pieces of it, which was fantastic. So good job to Grace and Adam. Ethan, do you want me to go on, or should I wait for you to ask me some to check in with you first, or what would you like to do?
No, if you can go ahead first.
So the other video.
Yes.
All right, great.
Thanks, Dr. Joelle.
Been since the last session. I don't think much has changed. Although I do feel more relieved that I am seeking help right now, through therapy. I hope that I'll be able to feel better, or at least know what to do, whenever I'm having my difficulties. This week was actually pretty hard because I actually got scolded by my boss. I still feel like I'm underperforming, and I hope that in the coming weeks I'll be able to change how I feel, and hopefully maybe change my perspective or something. Yeah. What does being more competent in my work mean to me?
So that question that was just asked there, and again, that's a really good question to be asked. allows us as therapists to understand again, like, what does the client think, how does the client think, right? Because again, the idea of competency is a fantastic word, but what it means from person to person can be very different. Some people's idea of competency is to be the very best, right? Some people's idea of competency is just to scrape by and not get scolded, for example. So again, that this is good probing questions to allow us to understand what's going on. Now, just to get a bit more technical as well, the kind of therapeutic orientation that you prescribe to will also dictate the kind of questions that you would ask. And by therapeutic orientation, I mean things like, do you practice CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy? Do you practice ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy? Do you practice SFBT, solution focused brief therapy, for example? These theories that you prescribe to as practitioners, right, or your therapist's theories, like, in that sense, right, allows us to have a framework in which to understand what's going on with you, right? And that framework helps us understand your problem and what's going on, and then we'll share that back with you, of course. But on top of that, it also allows us to then guide the interventions that we do and also the questions that we ask, right? So like this question, for example, what does competencies mean to you? As a CBT therapist, I'm already starting to look at all the different kind of thoughts and beliefs that the client has, because that's the framework that I'm working on in that sense. It helps me understand the client, right? An ACT client, an SFBT client, for example, might look at it from a more problem-solving kind of issue. What are the issues that the client has with competencies and how we can resolve them? So that's why we ask this kind of probing questions, to try and get a better understanding of you. Yeah.
I would say being able to carry out the tasks which I'm being given, not only well, like completing them well, but also completing them within the time frame. And I think that it is expected, that I complete those tasks on time, like with no setbacks or with no whatever happens, like whatever difficulties that happen, the task must still be carried out within the time frame and with the expected quality. That's what I believe competency means, and I also believe that one will be able to complete more than one task in a day, or like maybe like a few heavy tasks in a week, with good quality and within the time frame. That's what being competent means to me.
Oops, sorry. So again, just based on what Adam was saying just then, right? So just give you an example. As a CBT therapist, I'm already looking at what he just said then and looking and seeing that, okay, this guy has a lot of rules that he has to follow, a lot of shoulds and musts, like things like, I must complete more than one thing. I must be able to be on top of things, for example, and things like that. So he set a lot of rules for himself. So if it was me handling a session, like, then my next set of questions would be like, where does these rules come from? Where do these expectations come from? Because that, again, is driven by theory, right? So that's just an example of the thought processes that go through my head, and that's why I would guide my client towards as well, right?
How does my expectation of competency affected me at work? I feel like, because of, I don't know, some colleagues tell me it's perfectionism, but like the bad kind. They tell me that I'm trying to be too perfect on every particular task, and I think because of that, I tend to focus like a lot of time on one task, and sometimes I'm able to complete that task, which is good. But even when I do complete the task, I take up a lot more time than I should be taking, and the other tasks get pushed back. And because of that, I get very stressed out, and at the end of the week or at the end of the day, I'm only able to like complete one task, or even worse, I'm not able to complete the task at all. So I think this is how my work is being affected by what's going on.
So this question, which was how does your competencies or lack thereof affect your day-to-day work? I think it's a really interesting question to ask, right? And you'll find that sometimes therapists might ask you this question, and then after that completely go 180 and ask you about something else, like let's say your parents or your relationships, for example, and things like that. Now, when therapist does that, they do that again intentionally, right? It's not because we are bored with the story telling us or whatever it is, and then we think, okay, something else is more important. It's not that. But questions like this allow us to gauge and see how pertinent the problem is to the client, right? And the reason why I say that is because sometimes clients are going to identify a problem that they're going through, and it's fair, it's a problem they're going through. But in the grander scheme of things, it's quite a minor part of what's actually the bigger problem, right? And again, as a therapist, my job isn't to decide for the client what's right or wrong, what's important or not. It's not my role. But I would want to probe and see what actually is the crux of the problem here, in that sense, right? For example, in Adam's case, because, and again, for most of us, right, we spend 8, 10, 12 hours at work. And so because of that, work becomes the most predominant thing in our lives, right? Naturally, anything that triggers us or troubles us at work is going to be quite, quite at the forefront of our minds, basically, right, in that sense. So because of that, he might overemphasize his work things, where actually the main issue is actually relationships, for example, or his insecurities for his friends leaving him, for example, and things like that. So these are what we call gauging questions, to gauge and see how really it affects the clients or it does not. And then we can see where we go from there. Yeah.
Or what I have told a friend. What would I have told a friend who's having the same thoughts as me? I would say don't overthink things, and instead of focusing on perfecting the task, I think I would tell that friend to firstly be realistic, to plan out the tasks or the job functions that that friend has, that week. Prioritize, which is the most important, and which one would take up the most time. And then after that, to just focus on what can be done, not focusing on, oh, I need to get this task done perfectly. Not so much on that, but more so on oh, what can be done within this time frame, and just do their best from there on. I think that's what I would tell a friend.
Okay, so this question is it's a different kind of question, right? The first couple of questions that was asked in the intake session and in this session right now were very much more exploratory kind of questions. That means you're trying to find out more information, what's going on, the underlying thoughts and beliefs, that kind of thing, right? So it's really about understanding what's happening to the client. And for me, this is my personal view. When I do my therapy, that's what I call phase 1 therapy kind of thing, where we're trying to understand the nature of the problem. This question is good because it's different, because it's a phase 2 kind of question where now we know what's going on, what can we do about it, right? So that's the phase 2, the interventions part, so to speak, right? This question is, from a CBT perspective, is what we call a Socratic question, and that's where we start to challenge the thoughts that the clients have, right? So this question basically asks the client, if this same thing happened to your friend, what would you say to them, right? Now, this question is good because it inherently challenges the idea that your thoughts are true, right? Because if it was true, that means that your friend going through the same thing should have the very same reaction that you do, and should experience the same thing that you do as well, which is the depression and lethargy and all the kind of thing that Adam is going through, right? But the reason why we ask them to think about it for themselves, or what they would say to themselves, or to their friends, is because inherently we are challenging that thought that perhaps there could be a different way about it, right? Now, just to give you some background, as human beings, we're naturally very harsh on ourselves, right? And we're very much kinder to other people. Just to give you an example, when I was 15, many years ago, right, I got my PMR results, and I got, a couple of A's, couple of B's, not too bad, right? I came back home, and then I showed my dad my results. And my dad says, "Hey, what is this? How come I got B's? How come I didn't get straight A's?" And made me feel crappy, understandably so. That weekend, I went to my cousin's house, and he was the same age as I was, and he got his PMR results as well. And then my dad asked him, "Hey, what results did you get?" I got enough letters to I can spell words, right? He's got C's and D's and F's and E's and all that kind of thing. And what does my dad say to him? "Oh, it's okay. You can try harder next time. These things don't matter." And I'm sitting there thinking, what the heck? I got A's and B's and I got chewed out. And my dad just told my cousin, "Hey, it's okay, don't worry about it," right? And I think that's a really perfect example of how, I don't know whether it's an Asian thing or it's just a parent thing or it's just a us thing, I don't know. But we're naturally much, much harsher on ourselves than other people, right? And we're much, much kinder to other people for whatever reason, right? This question is wonderful, and I love this question actually, because it allows us to be kind to other people, and by extension, be kind back to ourselves upon reflection, right? So this is a good example of those intervention questions when we're trying to make a change in the client. Yeah.
What's the one thing that I can do to cope with things this week? I think it's been quite some time since I've played badminton, Before this, even when I started working, I was still playing. I was still playing badminton. I used to be very active last time, and as I started working, I was still playing, but maybe a little bit less. But ever since I took up this role, I haven't been playing at all because I would usually end work at maybe like 8 or 9 p.m. And by the time work is done, I'll be feeling too tired. Okay, all I want to do is just have dinner and just go to bed. So I think that playing badminton again would be a good outlet for me, so that release my stress and to just to just sweat it out, I guess. Yeah, badminton.
So following along the same theme of the previous question, this is another intervention question, right? A lot of times clients do have in the repertoire of coping mechanisms, the ability to get back up again. Maybe not all the way, but let's say 75% of the way, right? This example from Adam, playing badminton. If this was something he used to do like on a weekly basis, for example, but because of work and being stressed and being depressed after that, he stopped doing it. That means there's a significant coping mechanism, social aspect of his life that has been totally discarded in that sense. And we all know that, the more depressed you are, the more you need social contact because that's what keeps you going in that sense, right? So just by reminding him with this question like that, what can you do to cope better in that sense? Gives him that little bit of a boost and says, hey, I can do that again. And naturally, he'll feel better as a result of that, which is what we want to have for our clients as well.
If I can't play badminton, is there something I normally do to calm myself down? I think I used to be quite close with my previous team, before I got this new role, and I would open up to them and talk to them, and we will all share our difficulties, but ever since I transitioned to this new role, I haven't had the opportunity to do that, because I'm in a different team now. So maybe during work, perhaps I can grab lunch with them and just open up a little bit, and I could also get input from them on what to do in this current situation of mine. I think that would help.
Okay, so again, that last question there again was just to get the client to think about, alternatives, what else can you do about it and things like that. I think one thing that does happen sometimes for us is that, how that saying goes where if you stare at a problem too long, you can't figure it out because you're stuck in the problem. Sometimes you need to take a step back and see the bigger picture and see how we can better resolve the issue, right? This is one of those questions that help clients do that, right? They think that, the only way I can feel better is to, watch movies, play games, go online and things like that, which are helpful, but there are inherently a lot more other things that we can do as well. So getting them to think about alternatives is a good way to just get them started, get the ball rolling, and hopefully get them back on the feet again. Yeah. So that's the end of the videos that we have. And I think the team and the Reframe Project have done a fantastic job in helping highlight or demonstrate what typical sessions will look like. And this is actually quite a typical session, to be fair. Albeit a bit condensed. I think this second session that we watched, we probably split it up to maybe 2, maybe 3 sessions in that sense with a lot more information inside it. But generally speaking, that's the kind of experience that you will expect from coming for a therapy session, right? Nothing too scary. We don't ask you about your mom and dad and whether they loved you or not and things like that. It's not a big part about therapy. It's really about trying to understand where all these are coming from and see how we can help you with that. Okay. So thanks for listening to me blab for a good long while. I'll pass it back to Ethan now. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing, Dr. Joelle, and for really breaking down that scenario for us. Now, and for really taking us through, I think that really helps us. It also helps me getting a little bit of insight as to how we would help this fictional Adam a little better. I think although the case is something that we made and put together, some of these problems are very real.
Yeah.
Dr. Joelle, so it comes to time for the audience Q&A session, and I know we have some questions already in. Just want to remind our audience that if you have any questions regarding therapy itself that you'd like to drop in, you can feel free to do so. We have 4 questions here today, but before we go into that, I think one question that came up quite a bit, which ties into one of the questions here. So the first question here says, how and to what extent should clients educate themselves on their rights during a therapeutic alliance? So, the clients knowing their own rights, but then there was also a question that we received before the webinar in our registration asking what to do if you do not particularly click or you even feel uncomfortable around your therapist?
Okay. Let's answer the easier one first, which is the second question, right? If you don't click with your therapist, that is something that absolutely can happen, will happen, and it's expected to happen, right? I mean, if I ask you guys, for example, if you go to a party or you go to a new class, for example, and there's like 20, 30 people running around, realistically speaking, you're not going to like and jive with every single person in the room. Inherently, they're going to be people that you can mix with very, very well and good rapport with them. Inherently, you're going to have people you hate and you want to like, throw your drink at, for example, like just cannot tahan them, for example. Yeah. Therapy is much the same thing as well, right? I think therapy is predicated very significantly on the therapist-client relationship. That means the rapport that you and your client have. And if you feel that there's anything weird or funky or awry about a relationship with your therapist, then you should back off. You should say that, hey, I don't think it's a good fit. I want to try something else. And that's completely within your rights as a client to ask for. And for me as a therapist, I appreciate that as well, because then you don't waste your time and resources. And then I can point you in a direction where it's going to help you better. So it's win-win all around in that sense. Now, back to the first question, how much should clients educate themselves on the protection and the rights in therapy, right? I think 100%, right? If I had it my way, everyone would go into therapy knowing exactly what their rights and privileges as a client should be. Is that practical? No. Well, I think that's understandable because there is a lot of jargon and legalese and things like that, right? But ultimately, as much as you know, I think that you should know, basically, right? Most centers, when you sign up with them, will give you a policy document or something like that you can read on. And that basically details the kind of rights and privileges that you have as a client, what kind of expectations you can expect to have, for example, and things like that. And this is important because I think the clients need to be able to protect themselves. Like it or not, therapy, mental health in Malaysia is still a very young profession. It's a very young service in that sense, right? And because of that, again, unfortunately, there are lots of cowboy therapists around, right? While counselors, it's not so bad because they're governed by the LKM, the Lembaga Counselling in Malaysia, and the Akta Counselling. Clinics, for example, it's horrendous because we don't have anything that governs us technically. So honestly, any one of you guys can be clinical psychologists right now and no one can say a thing about it, right? Which is problematic because then you have people who are unscrupulous, who do bad work, who on the best side of things, the worst side of things, they do damage to their clients, right? And when the clients don't know what their rights and privileges are, then that damage, that abuse is just going to escalate in that sense. So ask questions. If you're unsure, ask. Any good therapist will be more than happy to answer your questions. If they don't, something is wrong somewhere. If they start challenging you back, yeah, something's wrong, So please go ahead, ask questions. Please protect yourself as well. Yeah.
So Joelle, for elaborating on that. So just taking a look out if a therapist, if you're asking them questions, are they getting a little bit defensive? And also being willing to share if you think that it doesn't work out. But having that frame of mind that really it's just natural to not perfectly get along with every individual that we meet. So this is not a completely abnormal thing.
That's right.
Dr. Joe, on that train of thought, I just wanted to ask a follow-up question. Is there a way, I know you could just let us know briefly that an audience member can check if their therapist is credible?
Yes and no. So LKM for counselors is fairly easy. If you go to the counseling, Lembaga Counseling website, there is a directory there, right? So you can just type in either your therapist's name or their KBPA number, which is their counseling license number. I can't remember what it stands for, but it's a number, right? Key in the website, their name should pop up. If it's not there, then you need to ask some serious questions really, whether or not this person is legitimate or not. From a ClinSci perspective, again, because we don't have an act yet, it's coming out. The AHPA Act, the Allied Health Professionals Act is coming out. I think because of the many changes in the government in the past couple of years, this has been delayed quite significantly, unfortunately, but it's coming out, right? So eventually we will be governed like the counselors will. But for now, what we do have is the Malaysian Society of Clinical Psychology, which I am a part of as well. I'm one of the EXCO members there. What you can do is that you can head to our website, mscp.my, and again, same process, type in either my name or my CP number, my ID, my license number, and you can check and see whether I am registered or not and whether I'm legitimate or not. Membership to the MSCP means that I am someone who has met the minimum requirements to be a practitioner in Malaysia. That's what it means, right? Now, the problem here is this. With LKM, every single counselor who wants to see clients needs to be registered on that. MMCP is not. It's an opt-in kind of thing. So we can not guarantee, but we can assure you that everyone on MSCP is a legitimate practitioner. But that doesn't mean that someone who is not an MSc member is not, right? Because again, it's not a mandatory kind of thing. So in those kind of cases, then you can choose to ask and your therapist's credentials, training experiences, and things like that to help you better understand what's going on.
Thanks for sharing, Dr. Joelle. I think some time ago, we also put out a post on our Instagram story with a set of links so people can check what is the LKM website that you can refer to type in the number. So I'm just going to drop the link here in case anybody wants to check out that resource to double check, what are the sites you can go to check if your therapist is qualified. Okay, now looking into the next question, there are some questions here, I think tying into the therapy sessions itself and accessibility. One question is asking a bit about how long does a therapy session take? I guess what is the logistics? And another question is revolving around fees that we received before the webinar. So the fees tend to range quite a lot.
Yep.
How do they know what is the market fee and what is the logistics of therapy?
Yeah. So let's talk about the duration first, because that's the easier one to answer, right? This varies quite a bit, right? There's something that in some therapists do something called a therapy hour. So which is basically 50 minutes of therapy, and then the 10 minutes of us after that, after the sessions ended, for us to like write notes and things like that. So some therapists do that. Some therapists might do longer sessions. Like for example, at the Mind, all our sessions are for 75 minutes, so longer than the 1 hour. And then the intake session, which is the first session that you have with your client, and they'll be collecting information from you, that's 100 minutes. So it's an hour and 40 minutes. So it's very much longer like in that sense, right? So there's quite a range of duration of sessions for different reasons. Settings also, sometimes if you go to MMPHA, for example, they've got lots and lots of clients, so they cannot afford to spend so much time with you. So it's 1 hour on the dot and then off you go kind of thing, right? So there's some variations there, right? In terms of how many sessions, now that one I cannot answer, right? Because like it or not, as much as therapy is grounded in science, it's evidence-based, we've got research that backs up what we do and all that kind of good stuff. The application of therapy is an art, right? Because everyone is different, everyone's problems is different, personality is different and things like that. So there's really no good way for us to be able to predict with any certainty how many sessions is required, right? For me, for example, for my own practice, I average about between 6 to 10 sessions around there for most of my clients. But to be fair, I've got clients who after 3 sessions, they feel as right as rain and off they go. I've got clients who I still see after 3 years, right? So this is a huge range and there's no way to predict in that sense, right? Now, in terms of the fees, that's again a very interesting question, but very hard to answer. LKM has set of recommended fee ranges for counselors, which I'm not very familiar with. You can check it out on the website and see. And they actually dictate how much a therapist should take per session, right? And while that is the case, I don't know the wording is such that there is a lot of room for interpretation, right? So, like for example, if it's 150, per session, which is fine. But what if my session is like an hour, 75 minutes or 100 minutes, for example? Then do we prorate the fees and things like that? So there's some room for interpretation there, right? MSCP recently just released what do you call it? Not research, but basically we canvass our team members to find out what the range of fees are, right? So to see a clinical psychologist, and most of the responses were in the Klang Valley and Penang, if I'm not mistaken, the fee ranges were anywhere between 250 to about 400 ringgit per hour. That seems to be the range that we're working with. I think the min max is about 150, and then the max is about $500-600. So that's the ranges that we're looking at. Therapy is not cheap. I think that's something that is a known thing, right? But there are options. Yes, I think someone was asking about those who cannot access therapy and things like that. So there are cheaper options as well. There are pro bono options as well, right? So like most universities like Monash, where I teach, full disclosure, they have discounted therapy rates. Help, where I came from, they have a student clinic that's run by trainees, again discounted rates. MMHA charges not very much, I think, for their sessions. Lots of good NGOs out there as well where you can get therapy at reduced rates, right? So there are options available. Just going to shop around a bit. Government also is a fantastic place to go to. HKL sessions, I think it's like 5 ringgit an hour for Malaysians or something like that. An IQ test that usually costs you 1,000 ringgit is only about $10-15 or something like that. Something really, really affordable. But the trade-off is time, lah, so you just have to wait a bit longer, lah. So those are some options to consider as well.
Okay, so just dialing it a bit back and summarizing. So typically a session is about an hour long. Some centers may go slightly longer depending on what is the need of the center. So 60 to 75 minutes. The first session is typically a bit longer. Now, in terms of like the price ranges, it's difficult to say. In the private setting, a clinical psychologist can be 200 to 400. For the counselors, there is actually a recommended guideline, but it still varies in private. So if I'm catching this correctly, you mentioned there's three categories. So there's the private area, private centers. Then there are NGOs like the Malaysian Mental Health Association, MIASA, and so on. And then there are universities that provide trainee counselors. I think either minimum fee or almost free, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. That's right.
Practicum students.
And fourth one is hospitals.
And the fourth one is government hospitals, which will see you at a very affordable rate. Just that it may not be time, it might take time to get an appointment.
Oh, sorry, just one more thing to throw in there, right? So right now they're trialing the Clinic Mentari, MENTARI. That is only in Klang Valley now, if not mistaken. And there's one in Subang, if not mistaken. So with the idea behind Clinic Mentaris is that it's similar to the clinics Kesehatans that they've been launching countrywide. So they're trying to decentralize treatment a little bit, so you don't have to always go to hospital. You can go to these facilities for mental health treatment. It's still fairly new, and COVID wasn't helpful in the trialing period, in that sense. So, but again, if you're in Klang Valley, there's something to check out as well.
Okay, so that's Clinic Mentari. It's a lot like the common health clinics and panel clinics that have been set up, but specifically for mental health and put up by the government. Okay, I think I Googled that before. It's a Mentari clinic, correct? You just type in those words.
That's right.
Okay. Yeah, so there's something new for us to explore. Hopefully we can see it develop in the coming years. All right, as we draw to a close, Dr. Joelle, thank you and everyone for your questions. But we just want to close up by asking you if there is someone in the audience right now who's thinking that they should go seek a therapist, whether it's an NGO setting, hospital setting, or even a university. What is one thing they can do for themselves after this webinar if they're considering seeking therapy?
So I think, like I said earlier on, I think if you reach the point where you are wondering whether you should go see a therapist or not, then I think the answer is more often than not yes, right? I think the first step would be to accept that, to say that, okay, I think I want to go see a therapist. I think it's okay for me to see a therapist. I just want to make sure that I'm okay, right? And then the next step after that will be to find some place that is right for you, right? I think if you Google things like Vibes, things like Chili Sauce, for example, and those kind of news websites, they've done a lot of good work in trying to make compilations of different places where you go for therapy at different price ranges and different settings as well, whether it's online or in person and things like that. So you can Google those kind of things and you'll find some really good information on where you can go. If you are on Reddit has a My Happy Pill thing in Malaysia. Ethan's laughing, he might be on it as well. They've got really good resources as well. Not the most up to date. I think they could do with some updating in that sense. But again, some good resources on where you can go and things like that. That's probably the next step. Third step is to take the plunge. I think that first step is always the hardest, is always the most daunting, right? But like everything that we do as therapists in therapy room is to try to make the process as comfortable and as easy as possible. You come in, we have conversations with you. It's not interrogative. It's not that it's not accusatory. We don't care about any of that. We just want to know what's going on and how we can help you. We assure you about confidentiality. Anything that you share with us, we don't share with anyone, right? So as much as we can, the entire therapy process should ideally be as smooth and as safe and secure as possible. At least we try to do that for you guys, right? So give it a go, try and see, best case scenario, like I said, nothing, be okay, just a minor blip in the road. Worst case scenario, we nip it in the bud as soon as we can. Yeah.
Thanks, Dr. Joelle. So summarizing that, the first step is to just make the decision and accept that you would like to see a therapist. The second thing is to Google some accessible resources. There's some compilations. And the third one is to finally go in and actually see a therapist. And trust that on the therapist side, their job is to make you feel more comfortable once you're there.
Yeah, we got your back. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that reassuring closing, Dr. Joelle. And thanks for spending your time here with us.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Now we'll just move on really quickly to our closing up session. Okay, Daryl, if I could get your help to share the slides, please. Dr. Joelle, just a quick question. Is there any way if people are you on social media? Is there some form where people can reach out to you or where you make yourself a public figure of attention?
No, I'm afraid that I'm quite shy, right? No. So you can find me. So not me, but the company pages, right? So if you type in the Mind PSAT, and I'll type that into the chat, right? Everyone. So you can use that and find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and all that kind of good stuff, right? And we are typically quite responsive to questions. So if you have a question you want to ask, you feeling a bit not secure to ask questions here, go ahead, find us there, and then we're more than happy to answer any questions that you have. We're rebuilding or revamping our website now. Eventually it's going to be a page where it's also a resource page where you can go and do simple assessments and also get resources like how to do deep breathing techniques, for example, how do you do grounding, mindfulness techniques, and things like that. So that's also hopefully a place where you can go for some help as well moving forward.
Thanks, Dr. Joelle, for letting us know. So I believe the tag or the name to look for has been put in the chat. So do take a look if you want to get to know more about the Mind psychological services and training. Okay, now just moving on to the closing bit. Daryl, can we get the next slide? Now, for us, of course, to understand, how we can bring the right information to you as an audience, how can we see what it is you want answered in the following sessions, and what it is your needs are as an audience, would we please get your help to sign into, okay, not sign into, like, I think scan is just how it works these days. Could we please get your help to scan the QR code here and let us know what you thought of today's session and what we can do more in the future. We'll have the link dropped in the chat as well, in case you prefer to click it old school. And also additionally, if you're considering to join us or volunteer with us to be a part of our team, please do scan this QR code. It's another Google form. It's a pretty friendly Google form, I think. It doesn't bite. Let us know if there's something you're interested in, and if there's a fit, we'll get back to you. Okay, so we're just going to put this up on screen, see if we can get a bit of background music, and we'll leave it up for a minute. Okay, the links are also in the chat. You can reach out there. We've got some background sounds to ease out into the night. So Dr. Joelle, since we have a little bit of time, a couple of minutes left, I think we got some questions about being a clinical psychologist.
Yeah, typing furiously into the chat box, not trying to answer the question.
I'm
like,
so sorry.
answer it verbally as well. Be like, yeah.
Yeah. Would you like to answer it verbally? Daryl, can we get the music a little softer?
So I think fintech programs are competitive just because they're very small sizes, right? So most of the more credible programs around, the sizes are between like 10 to 12 people per year, and it's one intake per year kind of thing. So it's competitive, right? So because of that, then yeah, that's the why it's competitive. So naturally, because of that, then they will pick, the students with the better grades as a first filter, and then after that, they will do an interview process with you to understand you better and things like that, right? I think the question also asks, is there any way we can do to stand out? I think that's a hard question to answer because every setting will have different requirements or different things they're looking for. Like for me, for example, if I was interviewing supervisees, that means students to come and work with us and train with us, I think one thing that I do look out for is the students' intentionality, the why behind them wanting to be a therapist. I think is incredibly important, right? Because if you're doing it because you want the fame and fortune, which is absolutely not true, it's hard to be rich as a therapist, or if they're doing it because I want to save everyone, I want to take care of people around me, those typically are the responses that I don't enjoy so much, because I think when it's such an externalized driver for you, it's not sustainable. Because if you want to save people and that's your intention, that also means that if your clients don't get saved or they don't get better, then you are in trouble, right? And that's not sustainable at all, right? Rather, responses like, for example, I've got a genuine interest for people, I want to understand what makes them tick and then see how I can help them, for example. And that's a lot more of a personal motivator, and I think those are better reasons to do the work that you do, right? Another thing I think is also the ability to connect with people. What I found over the years is that a lot of times the students with the best GPAs, like straight flat fours and things like that, don't always make the best therapists, because I think while there are a lot of things that you can learn from a textbook and from a lecturer, like CBT and assessments and all that kind of things, inherently there's some things that are quite intuitive and you have it or you don't, and that's the ability to connect with people. And it seems so simplistic, it seems like such a small thing, but it's not. I think sometimes people just cannot connect with other people, right? And it's going to be very hard for you to be a therapist in that sense. So those are some of those unmeasurable kind of things that we do look out for, and that's what we want as well in the therapist that we work with. So it's not a great answer. I can't remember who asked that question. Can't remember who. It's not a great answer because it's so vague, but it is what it is. Hopefully that helps. Yeah.
Thanks, Dr. Joelle, for sharing. And for those of you who stayed back, that was our post-credit scene. Just keeping in line with the trends. Okay, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you again, Dr. Joelle. If you're feeling particularly enthusiastic, feel free to give him a round of applause. I'm sure he will feel it in spirit. Okay, with that, our feedback forms are still up here. If you haven't scanned them yet, please go do ahead. And if all is well, we wish you a good night, and we thank you for joining us in this particular webinar. Dr. Joe, a quick one, another short post-credit question, which we thought suddenly came in, while those who are still here can answer, can glean from. Somebody mentioned that, I think it came from our Facebook Live. They were asking, if there is no board for clinical psychologists, is the informed consent still valid?
Yes and no lah. No, in the sense that even if we do break it, there's nothing that no one can do anything to us technically. And there have been many reported cases of people who claim to be clinical psychologists who are not, who then do unscrupulous work and they do damage to their clients. And then when the clients try to take action, like sue them, whatever it is, there's nothing that can be done, right? Yes, in the sense that I think a lot of us choose to be therapists because we genuinely want to help. We want to take care of our clients and things like that. So as self-righteous as this is going to sound, I follow the ethical guidelines not because I have to, but because I want to, because I truly believe that gives my client the best possible means of getting better and getting back on your feet, and that allows me to do the best work that I can do, right? So for now, while there's no governance, then it's really about my passion to do good work, right? From the MSCP's point of view, if you are an MSCP member, that means you're subject to the MSCP rules and regulations and ethical guidelines and all that. So if you are in violation of any of the rules, let's say you had a romantic relationship with a client, right, for example, what you would then happen was then that there'll be a formal note lodged on your name, right? You'll be kicked out of the MSCP and you'll lose your membership. And then from there onwards, if there's any references made to you or any inquiries made about you, then we will share that case, because that's what happened, right? So that's one layer of protection that MSCP gives the community in that sense, right? So yeah, so for now, that's what we have to go with. Eventually, then we'll be governed like the counselors, and then it should be better than.
So just recapping, so the psychiatrists have the medical profession and so on to review them. The counselors' informed consent is tied to whether or not they can maintain their license if anything goes wrong.
Okay.
And for the clinics at the moment, there is still the MSCP to make sure that the public is aware that this particular individual has caused some issues and harm. And also, I guess, action taken on their membership to the MSCP lah.
That's right.
Okay. Thanks for answering that, Dr. Joelle. I think with that, we will officially close up our webinar for tonight.
Okay.
All right. See you all. Thank you again for being part of this webinar. We will see you next time.